Hello. Very good to see you.
Good to see you.
So pillar 2, building trusting teams.
Yes.
Now, you had some great examples in here. Made me smile a lot.
Yeah.
Ford and Shell.
Yeah.
Ones I actually hadn't heard a lot of before. But you also had some examples of where if you don't have a trusting team, it can go so horrifically wrong, and
Yeah.
people can start behaving in a manner that you can't actually believe people think it was okay.
Yeah.
Like in Wells Fargo
Yeah.
example, and you called it ethical fading.
Yeah.
I'd just love for you to elaborate on a few of those
Sure.
points, because the stories were so fascinating, and you wrote it in such a way that was just so easy to understand and feel so emotional about it.
Thank you. Well, ethical fading is a concept in psychology. It exists. Ethical fading is when people make unethical decisions or ethically questionable decisions believing that they're well within the framework of their own ethical standards. In other words, they don't think they've done anything wrong, or they can somehow sort of rationalize around it. And when an organization is more finite driven, it increases the chances that ethical fading can happen. The example you brought up, Wells Fargo Bank in the United States were caught, they were opening fake bank accounts without permission, or sending out credit cards to people who didn't request them so that they could drive up their own internal numbers. They had sales goals to meet. They couldn't meet their sales goals, so they literally opened fake bank accounts and sent out fake credit cards. And the way some people found out about it is when they started getting collections notices for accounts they didn't open. They opened 3.5 million fake bank accounts. And the organization comes out and says, you know, corporate nonsense, you know, we operate to the highest standards of, which clearly for 10 years they hadn't, or whatever it was, however many years they hadn't. So this is ethical fading, and the people who are doing it, they're not bad people. And the standards that create ethical fading are things like the excessive use of euphemisms, which you see in a lot of organizations. For example, we don't ever discuss, or we don't discuss the negative impact of our manufacturing practices on the people who work in our factories and the communities in which our factories exist. We talk about managing externalities. You know, we don't talk about spying on our customers. We talk about data mining, right? Data mining is good. Spying on our customers, we would never do, right? But this overuse of euphemisms, it allows us to disconnect ourselves from the impact of our decisions. And so that's one of the things you see in these organizations. The old slippery slope, of course. You know, I did it once, it worked. I did it twice, it worked. And then
my colleague's doing it.
My colleague's doing
it too. Otherwise, I'm going to...
And this crazy amount of rationalizing. It's exactly right. Well, like, that's what my boss wants. I got to put food on the table. Everyone's doing it. If I don't do it, I'll lose my job. And so we can rationalize sometimes abhorrent behavior that we know is unethical and sometimes even illegal. But when these circumstances exist, when these conditions exist, an organization can go full-on ethically faded. And so you look at the 2008 stock market crash and what happened to global economies, and we blame the bankers. We blame sort of the excessive speculation and the mortgage crisis. And we say things like, how can you sleep at night? They sleep just fine, because they don't perceive that they've done anything wrong, even though it's completely man-made. So when there's an excess amount of finite thinking inside an organization, in other words, a drive for the short term and a drive to win in a system where there's no such thing as winning, it opens the doors to ethical fading happening. And we see that in organizations that tend to do really unscrupulous things.
Pillar 3 is find a worthy rival. And you talk about this so personally. I'd love for you to tell this story, because it is such a good one.
So yeah, there's another guy out there who does what I do. He writes books, he gives talks, and I hate him. He's never done anything to me. I've met him many times in professional settings, and he's always been charming and nice to me. And I just have this irrational sort of hatred of him. and as a result, I'm really competitive with him. And so I will regularly go online and check my book rankings, for example, and then I'll immediately check his. And I don't check anyone else's, I just check his, and if I'm ahead, I'm really smug, and if he's ahead, I get really annoyed, you know? And we were asked to speak at the same event, and I don't mean like me in the morning, him in the afternoon, like we were going to be interviewed at the same time on the stage together, and the interviewer thought it would be fun if we introduced each other. So I went first. And I turned to him on the stage and I said, you make me really insecure. I said, all of your strengths are all of my weaknesses, and whenever your name comes up, it makes me really uncomfortable. And he looked at me and he said, funny, I feel the same about you. The reason I was so competitive with him, and the reason I had such contempt for him, had nothing to do with him. It had to do with me. His strengths revealed to me my weaknesses, and it was much easier to take that uncomfortable feeling and direct it into a competitive energy instead of taking a hard look at myself saying, I could really work on this stuff. The funny thing was having that experience with him was unbelievably cathartic. I love him now. We've actually become very close friends. Turns out people can buy more than one book. And we now work together because our skills are actually complementary. And I don't check his book rankings anymore, which is really sort of nice. And so in a finite game, we have competitors, and competitors are to be beaten, right, based on the score. But in the infinite game, I think it's unhealthy to have competitors because it directs our energy to beat people in games that there's no finish line. And so it's a healthier attitude to view the other players not as competitors but as rivals. And some of those rivals are worthy of comparison. Some of our rivals do things better than we do. They make better products than we do. They have a stronger culture than we do. Their leadership is better than ours. And instead of hating them and trying to outdo them, rather to take a look at ourselves and say, we can become better versions of ourselves. Because the only true competitor in an infinite game is ourselves. And the opportunity is constant improvement. We can have worthy rivals as organizations, but we can have worthy rivals as individuals as well. I think it's very unhealthy to create internal competitors, to have internal competitors where we're trying to outdo each other on the same team. We've all done this, where you hear of someone that you work with on your team get a promotion and you get angry. Yeah. Think about that. We got angry at someone else's good fortune. Well, what is it about them that's making us insecure or uncomfortable? And rather being angry at their success, rather look at ourselves and say, how can I improve?
Another quote that I love from the book is that you say, I like to think I write philosophy books disguised as business books. And that brings me nicely on to pillar 4, existential flexibility. What a cool term. I love it. Although I bet you it gives many management teams nightmares.
Yeah.
Can you bring that to life for us?
Sure. So existential flexibility is a leader's willingness to make a profound strategic shift in order to help the organization continue to advance the cause. This is not the daily flexibility we need to run a business, nor is this an entrepreneur who's found another shiny object and think this is it for the next 2 weeks and drives their people crazy. Most leaders will never have to make an existential flex, and if it does happen, it'll maybe happen once, at most twice in an entire career. But a great example of it, I think one of my favorite examples of it, is when Steve Jobs, in 1979, December of 1979, Apple's already a big company, they're already well respected, they've had the success from the Apple I and the Apple II, and Jobs and a bunch of his senior executives went and visited Xerox PARC. And Xerox showed them a new invention that they'd come up with called the graphic user interface, which allowed people to use a computer by moving a mouse, and you can move the cursor over the desktop to click on icons and folders to work the computer, which in those days was profound, because prior to that you had to learn a computer language to work a computer. So Jobs, who had this vision, this just cause to empower individuals to stand up to Big Brother, saw this development, this technology, as a huge leap to help him empower individuals. That means more people could use a computer. And so he says to his senior executives, we have to invest in this graphic user interface thing. And one of them, the voice of reason, says to him, Steve, we can't, because we've already invested millions of dollars and countless man hours on a completely different strategic direction. We can't suddenly shift completely because we'll blow up our own company. To which Jobs actually said, better we should blow it up than someone else. And so he was willing to walk away from that massive investment because he saw a better way to advance his just cause, and that decision led to the Macintosh, which is a computer operating system so profound that the entire software of Windows is designed to act like a Macintosh. The reason we all have a computer on our desk, the reason a computer has become a household appliance, is because we all know how to use one, and it's really easy to use one thanks to this willingness to blow up his own company. And unfortunately, without a sense of just cause, and without the trusting teams who are willing to suffer the short-term pain to make that strategic shift, most leaders don't.
Pillar 5 is the fifth and final pillar, and that is courage to lead. And I was really struck by your example about Ford in this one.
Yeah.
I didn't know much about Ford before, and how they had the most amazing leader in Henry Ford, big visionary, and then went into a decline in middle leaders, and now they've come back with a visionary. I think that's a great example of leadership.
Ford, unfortunately, has slipped back down again, but for that little period, there was a glimmer of hope.
But it does show the differences. It shows how, with the different leaders, your company can be in a very different
absolutely.
position.
So, and it goes back to that CVO idea. Ford was heading very fast towards bankruptcy in the mid-2000s, and they brought in a new CEO, a man by the name of Alan Mulally, who had completely turned around Boeing Commercial. And very often when we hear about turnaround stories, a CEO comes in and slashes costs and lays people off, and it makes the company look good on paper, and then they leave, and everybody celebrates the turnaround, and the company, goes into steep decline. That's not a turnaround. That's short term. Mulally did something more profound, which is he went back to the founding cause that he was given. He recognized he was the protector of a vision that he did not come up with, which was Henry Ford's vision, was to bring mass transportation, the car, to the average working person, to open up the highways. And he looked at the Ford's portfolio and saw that they owned companies like Jaguar, and I think they might have even owned Lamborghini. And he looked at himself, we're a company about mass market, we're a company about the average working person to help them get out on the open road. Why do we own luxury cars? That's not why we exist. That's not what we were founded to do. So the first thing he did was he sold off all of the companies, as he saw them as distractions from the core purpose of the organization. But the other thing he recognized is he had an organization that wasn't built to advance a cause. He had an organization that was run previously completely out of fear. And he sat down with his senior executives for these meetings to find out how Ford was doing, and they would show slides of each of their divisions, and all this, there was, red, yellow, green, really, really simple. And they all had slides filled with green. Everything in their divisions was going perfectly. And he'd sit there and say to them, guys, our company is losing billions of dollars. Something has to be wrong. And they all just sat there. And then the next week, all green. And he would say the same thing, guys, we're losing billions of dollars. And that's because the previous leadership would berate the executives if they delivered any bad news, and you could actually lose your job if you delivered any bad news. So these are the senior most executives of a major global corporation that were lying to their CEO because they were afraid.
And can you imagine what the knock-on was? Everyone would be
exactly
lying to everyone.
Right. So when people say that business isn't emotional, business is rational, well, here's the senior most people in an organization making decisions lying out of fear, which is an emotion, certainly not rational. And finally, one executive took the risk to turn one slide red, and Mulally said, thank you for the transparency. How are we going to help him? And he was very smart. He said, he made sure to remind the people, you are not the problem, you have a problem. And the question is how do we work together to fix the problem you have? And he did. He turned Ford around, and it became a remarkable place to work again, and a truly innovative leader. It also didn't need a government bailout in the 2008 crisis. It was kind of an amazing story.
You've gotten to know my dad and my brother and me over the last few years, and quite a few of the Virgin companies. What do you think Virgin's just cause should be?
Oh, I can't say what your just cause should be, but I can interpret what I think it is based on what you've been doing. I think Virgin is trying to bring a little color to a very gray world, and the company personifies, or rather, the company embodies the personality of your dad, and he brings a little color into a gray world. He's this amazing optimist who there's a silver lining in every cloud. He struggles to see bad things, and the businesses that Virgin seems to thrive in are the gray industries, where there's an opportunity for color. And it seems like, and you know a lot better than I do, I'm just guessing, that the industries where Virgin didn't succeed, there was sort of, it was fine. Like there was nothing that, like cola, like it's a pretty colorful industry. So I think that, you know, I think that we need more optimism in the world. And I think Virgin is a shining beacon of goodness. Goodness in people, goodness in stuff, goodness in things, goodness in service. And it's reflected in the people who work there and the people we interact with when we use a Virgin product or a Virgin service. So I think Virgin is trying to make the world a little more colorful, a little brighter.
I think I just tricked Simon into giving us some free work. Thank you.
Well, it's what you're already doing. It's what I see.
Well, thank you so much, Simon. That was brilliant. The way you explain things is so wonderful.
Thank
and it's
you.
just so easy to understand and makes me excited about the future.
Thanks, Holly.
So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.